direction of warfare is one of the key sort of secret trends the past 2 or so decades that most Americans have no idea about. Mm-hmm. Yet it could become one of the dominant themes of insecurity in the 21st century.
Whether you agreed with Iraq or not, once you're there, you have certain ideals that you have to put forward as a representative of your country. If you're killing, even if you engage in an act which the perception is you're killing civilians, that's bad. And these folks went beyond that. And I think actually it was proven, at least in the public, in the court of public opinion, that they acted without regard to self-restraint and thereby damaging both the reputation of the United States and frankly, the reputation of Blackwater to the point of where it had to change its name multiple times.
What the U.S. has created now, after the U.S. sort of drew down from Afghanistan and Iraq, is that a lot of those guys, or mercenaries essentially, are now in the open market. And we're seeing other countries imitate the U.S. model. Nigeria hired mercenaries to go after Boko Haram. They did. They successfully pushed up Boko Haram from Nigeria. We see mercenaries in, Yemen killing Houthis. We see mercenaries all over Syria and Iraq, Afghanistan, all over the Ukraine. Both sides. So Eastern Ukraine's a shooting war right now. Doesn't get covered much in the news, but both Russia hires mercenaries and Ukraine hires mercenaries. Mercenary warfare is back after 300 years of hiding the shadows. It's now being resurrected. And we're getting to a point now where what happens if ExxonMobil hires its own military? Or some random billionaire or some oligarch. That's the world we're facing in the decades ahead of us.
I think it's a bad course of action by the U.S. government, by the Obama administration, who came in talking about accountability. Look, people died here, and yet you're giving a fine to the company. You just talked about airlines in your preface to this, airlines not doing the right thing to maintain public safety. My goodness, you would hold an airline accountable for bad acts. Why would you not hold accountable a group of mercenaries for equally, if not even worse, bad acts where people died? So it's a bad course to set, and frankly, it is nothing more than a bunch of money from a company and no one is going to be held accountable. So I think it's very bad all around that they're not seeking accountability. Again, criminal accountability. I cannot believe you're actually paying a bill to get out of criminal allegations. That's a very bad precedent to set.
Can we be sure that no future violations will be incurred?
Absolutely not. That's one of the issues, again, where I'm critical of the whole process of bringing in contract mercenaries, if you will, to conduct military operations in a foreign environment. You have less capability of accountability, and frankly, I work with our Congress here all the time, and I've been a big proponent of Congress interceding in this, saying you cannot send mercenaries to do an act where someone who has taken the oath of office should be sent to conduct military action. It's bad regarding economics. It's bad regarding accountability. In many ways, organizations like our Central Intelligence Agency use mercenaries to get around congressional oversight, which again is not good for anybody if they do that.
And neocons who push for that Iraq war say over and over again, well, America is exceptional. We are of such high morals that no one should even question our motives. You see that exceptional morality displayed there by the Blackwater guys? This is among the many reasons why we can't contract out our wars to private contractors that are above the law and are not liable for anything they do, and then actually get us in much bigger trouble because they alienate the very people that we are supposed to be helping.
The year is 1962, and the United States is embroiled in a global struggle for power known as the Cold War. On one side stands the U.S. and its democratic allies, and on the other, the Soviet Union and its expanding network of communist states. Cuba has recently fallen to communism, replacing the military dictatorship there that was propped up by the United States. And acting more in its own interest rather than in an interest to promote democracy, the U.S. has decided that this cannot stand. A communist ally of the Soviet Union simply cannot be allowed to remain so close to U.S. shores, especially with the possibility of opening up military bases for use by Soviet forces, placing them less than 100 miles from the Florida coast. The Joint Chiefs of Staff, supreme commanders of the various branches of the U.S. Armed Forces, had a much more straightforward idea. They say that to a hammer, every problem looks like a nail, and the U.S. military is very much a hammer, and Castro was very much a particularly troublesome nail. At first, they floated the idea of simply bombing Castro, not secretly, the way the CIA planned to do in a bid to avoid international outrage, but much more overtly with a strike by military aircraft. Short, sweet, and very much to the point. Within seconds, Castro would be less a bothersome nail that needed hammering and more a floating cloud of ashes. When the Joint Chiefs were reminded, however, that this was not the way the US did things, they realized that if they wanted to kill Castro dead, and they definitely did, then they would need an excuse to do so. Thus, the Hammers decided to get sneaky and came up with one of the most morally abhorrent plans to remove Castro from power in US history. With the CIA elbows deep in Operation Mongoose, the official codename for the removal of Castro, the Joint Chiefs decided that the best way to kill or remove Castro would be through military force. Yet an unmerited invasion of Cuba would have not just disastrous political consequences, but would never be supported by the American people themselves. The U.S. would need a reason to go to war against the tiny island nation, something that every American could get behind and support. Under the codename of Operation Northwoods, a series of plans to justify the invasion of Cuba were drawn up. Known as false flag operations, the Joint Chiefs drew up a series of plans to conduct hostile operations against its own military and civilians, as well as those of neighboring nations, while making it look as if the attacks were being carried out by Cuban operatives. To achieve their ultimate objective of a Cuban invasion, the Joint Chiefs made the following proposals, all to be carried out by clandestine American agents. Number 1. Attacking Guantanamo Bay Naval Station, either with teams of fake commandos who would then be captured, or by lobbing mortar shells into the installation from outside of its boundaries. Aircraft could be purposefully set on fire and sabotaged by individuals inside the base, and a ship, either a real Navy ship with actual sailors aboard or a drone ship, could be blown up in Guantanamo Bay itself, with the blame falling on Cuban military forces. This would be purposefully reminiscent of the Remember the Maine incident in 1898, where a U.S. battleship was sunk in Havana Harbor, with the death of 260 American soldiers. The incident helped spur the American public to support a war against Spain and secure Cuban semi-independence. Number 2. The Pentagon would foster a homegrown terror campaign in Florida, Washington, and possibly other cities, all perpetuated by fake Cuban operatives and blamed on Cuban refugees seeking haven in the United States. This would include the gunning down of American civilians on the street and the planting of bombs in public places, all with the intent of whipping up the American public into a frenzy against Cuban refugees and thus Cuba. Number 3. Perhaps because even the Joint Chiefs thought at the time that murdering American civilians might be too cold-blooded, they also suggested that instead of terror attacks against American citizens, they could launch a series of fake terror attacks against Cuban refugees, or sink boats which they point out could be real or simulated full of refugees. The purpose of this campaign would be to foster a sense of pity for refugees from Americans, who would surely support a war against the evil Fidel Castro and his Cuban government.
What I want is somebody that can lay up some plans to trap these guys and whoop hell out of them, kill some of them. That's what I want to do.
I'll try and bring something back that will meet that objective.
On the morning of August 4th, 1964, I began my first full-time employment in the Pentagon working under Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara. My very first day on the job, all hell broke loose. A courier came running in with a flash cable saying that American warships were under attack in the Tonkin Gulf off the coast of North Vietnam. And I was getting these because my boss was already down the hall with McNamara picking targets to retaliate against North Vietnam. Minute after minute, more cables came in. 3 torpedoes have been fired. 7, we are taking evasive action. At about 1:30 our time, comes a new cable from the commodore of the 2 ships. Hold everything, in effect. All previous reports of torpedoes are in question.
Renewed hostile actions against United States ships on the high seas in the Gulf of Tonkin have today required me to order the military forces of the United States to take action in reply.
Within days, it was clearer and clearer that there had been no attack.
I shall immediately request the Congress to pass a resolution.
Congressional leaders of both parties supported the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. In fact, only 2 members of Congress voted against the resolution, Senators Morse of Oregon and Greening of Alaska.
Being in the minority never proves that you're wrong. In fact, history is going to record that Senator Greening and I voted in the interest of the American people this morning when we voted against this resolution. And I'd have the American people remember what this resolution really is. It's a resolution which seeks to give the President of the United States the power to make war without a declaration of war.
It's also been suggested that Washington was putting a great deal of pressure on you to come up with some positive answers to what happened that night. A positive answer being, yes, we were attacked.
Well, I'm sure they needed one, and that's what we were trying to obtain for them, and we did, and sent it in.
If they'd been able to discover the facts as they actually were, I don't believe they'd passed the resolution, because it was based upon absolutely false, erroneous information. The events as they related them of August the 4th, 1964, were not true. Our ships it was not an unprovoked, deliberate attack. In fact, there was no attack at all.
June 1967. The 6-day war in the Middle East between Israel, Egypt, Jordan, and Syria is underway. A spy ship, very lightly armed, but bristling with antennae, steams into the Mediterranean to eavesdrop on the conflict. It is patrolling in international waters off the Egyptian coast. At 2 in the afternoon, on June the 8th, with the war reaching its climax, Israeli jets and motor torpedo boats launch an unprovoked attack on the ship. They drop napalm and strafe its decks with rockets, cannon fire, and armor-piercing rounds before trying to sink it with torpedoes.
We had no way to defend ourselves, and it was just, we're just slaughtered.
And they shot up the life rafts that were put into the water, and they shot the ones that were still on board the ship.
Bullet holes, shell holes everywhere, blood. The forecastle, the front part of the ship, was just red with blood.
Throughout the attack, the ship flies the Stars and Stripes, the flag of Israel's closest ally, the United States of America. Its name, the USS Liberty, is freshly painted on its stern, and the bow carries the distinctive numbers of an American naval vessel.
Out of a crew of just under 300, there were 34 killed and 172 injured in varying degrees to life-threatening, life-debilitating injuries. So that was more than 2/3 of the crew.
This audio tape, which has never been broadcast before, was recorded in real time by the Israeli military during the assault. The woman's voice in the background is counting down the seconds. It proves that Israeli commanders knew all along that they were attacking an American ship.
The attack took place over 2 hours on a clear, blue, sunny day. This ship was an allied ship of Israel. The United States had been supporting Israel hand and foot to that point. So when the Israelis were doing their overflights, all the Americans were waving to the Israeli jets to the point they could actually see the pilots in the cockpits. They were that close. This attack occurred over about a 2-hour period. Thousands of rounds were fired, 50 caliber machine gun, napalm, rockets. They brought in submarine, they brought in torpedoes. I believe 4 torpedoes were fired at the USS Liberty. One of them hit. It was an act of God that the captain managed to avoid 3 of the others. If that one torpedo had hit 15 inches over, it would have hit the boiler room and that entire ship would have sunk. Another aspect of this is a blatant war crime whereby when the captain actually gave the order to abandon ship, all of the life rafts that were launched in the water were shot out of the water by the Israelis. That is a patent war crime. The real objective here was to frame Egypt for having been responsible for this attack, to kill every single member of that ship, over 200, and ultimately, because they were not able to sink the ship, the Phantom jets that had been launched towards Cairo, which were nuclear armed, were not able to be used. But make no mistake about it, I believe, having read many of the details of this and read Phil Turney's excellent book, What I Saw That Day, that it is absolutely clear that the only thing that saved us from World War III at that time was the fact that that ship did not sink and there were witnesses. And it also brings up a very interesting subject about a Russian ship that was in the area that may very well have staved off the sinking of the ship as well. So this was a blatant attack. It was a false flag and it didn't go according to plan.
But Daniel, you know, when it's ever mentioned, I read an article in Haaretz just a few days ago, it was a mistake. It was an honest mistake. That's what is being fed to publics right now whenever it pops up. Go ahead, Daniel.
Well, certainly that's the word that came down from LBJ on down. You know, the Commission of Inquiry, the Court of Inquiry was told before the investigation what the conclusion was to be, and I think he was quoted, at least maybe apocryphally, saying, "I'm not going to go to war or embarrass an ally for a few sailors." So that was obviously from the top on down. Admiral McCain, the father of our great senator from Arizona, was involved in the cover-up as well. But you make a good point earlier, most of America doesn't know what happened.
Okay, well, the reason for that was because of the cover-up that was immediately invoked by President Johnson, directing it to the Joint Chiefs, to Robert McNamara, to Admiral John McCain II, the father of the senator. And it was so effectively done and so brutally enforced. All of the survivors were threatened with prison time if they said a word about it to anybody, including their wives, their mothers, their fathers, anybody. And right immediately after the attack, after they managed to survive this, they were all dispersed throughout the world on different ships so that no 2 of them would be together anywhere. And they were watched very closely to be sure that they didn't talk. And that cover-up still persists today. That's the reason that 98% of the people have never heard of it, and those who do have generally accepted the canard that it was just an accident.
And that Israel can do anything, including murdering 34 American service members in cold blood and attempting to murder every single member of the USS Liberty, so as to justify a policy which would have sucked American sons and daughters into a 3rd World War, because Israel does not have the integrity nor the courage or any kind of honor whatsoever to go and attack its enemies itself. It uses America and continues to use America as sacrificial lambs to go off and fight their wars so that Israel can expand. This is the bigger issue, and the USS Liberty, as long as the American people refuse to face this and actually make sure that justice is served, we're going to continue to get more of the same of these false flag endeavors to sacrifice more and more Americans. And let us not forget the 22 American service members a day that commit suicide because they've been sent off to fight Israeli wars.
President Trump said today he's seen the evidence and it points to Iran in attacks that disabled 2 tankers yesterday in the Gulf of Oman.
This is only the latest in a series of attacks instigated by the Islamic Republic of Iran and its surrogates against American and allied interests. And they should be understood in the context of 40 years of unprovoked aggression against freedom-loving nations.
We have no reason not to believe the American assessment, and our instinct is to believe it because they're our closest ally.
I repeat, Israel will not allow Iran to develop nuclear weapons that threaten our existence and endanger the entire world.
So let's get right into this and begin to examine the latest US, Israeli, UK pushed claims about Iran and see if they hold up to reality. Mike Pompeo has claimed that the recent attack on the 2 oil tankers in the Persian Gulf was the doing of Iran. However, they have provided no information that could hold up in a court of law. Not only this, but they conveniently leave out the fact that a US drone had been fired at by Iranian air defense just before the attack, that for the first time ever, the Japanese Prime Minister was in Iran attempting to help ease tensions, and it just so happens that one of the ships attacked was Japanese-owned. Iran also rescued 44 people from the tanker, debunking an earlier US claim of their supposed overinflated rescue mission. The targeting of the Aramco Saudi pipeline was also blamed on Iran by the US Director of Joint Staff, Michael Gilday. However, the attack came out of Yemen and was done by Ansar Allah. There is absolutely no proof of any sort of Iranian involvement in that attack. A Katyusha rocket reportedly landed near the US embassy in Baghdad and was blamed on an Iranian proxy. However, there's not even any proof that the embassy was the target, no people were injured, and there's simply no evidence leading to direct Iranian involvement. Mike Pompeo has also claimed that Iran has been involved in the downing of US aircraft on June the 6th, but failed to mention that the aircraft was an MQ-9 drone, not a manned aircraft, which was shot down by Ansar Allah in Yemen, a place the US has no right to be in the first place. Oh, and there's also no evidence that Iran had any involvement. Then we come to the UK, where the media have recently claimed that an Iranian-backed Hezbollah-linked radical had been stockpiling explosive materials. And it doesn't just sound crazy. The incident allegedly occurred in 2015, and the man that was arrested for the supposed stockpiling of explosive materials was released without a charge at all. There is also no information available on the names of those supposedly involved. There were no documented court cases and no information published proving a connection to Hezbollah, let alone Iran. Then, an Israeli official later confirmed that the intel for this came from Israeli Mossad. In addition to this, is the case of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, a woman who is being held in Iran for, as former Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson said, training journalists, who presumably would work on anti-Iran propaganda according to Iranian intelligence. But of course, the UK media ignores all of the charges against her and have painted her as an innocent mother simply trying to get home, attempting to lead the British public to think that Iran will just randomly arrest innocent mothers with British passports without any reason. So these are the allegations, but let's look at a little bit of what the West has been doing to Iran. Let's begin with the Iran nuclear deal. The US damaged its international reputation and the prospect for peace with Iran in the near future when Trump withdrew from the JCPOA, presumably on the orders of the Israel lobby. Keep in mind that also Europe still wanted the deal, and all the experts confirmed Iran was complying with the deal. The US has since ramped up sanctions as a means of attempting to damage Iran's civilian population. And sanctions are an act of war in of itself. For example, approximately 1 million children alone were killed by US sanctions on Iraq under Saddam Hussein. The US then declared Iran's IRGC as a terrorist organization, the first time a state institution has been declared as such. And guess what? Just like the sanctions and the withdrawal from the nuclear deal, the Israel lobby and hardline neocons were behind this move too. Back in May, the US also deployed the USS Abraham Lincoln Strike Group, the USS Arlington Amphibious Transport Dock, additional Marines, Patriot missile systems, and a bomber strike force to the region in order to threaten Iran. Trump also used the legal loophole of Saudi Arabia being under threat to sell Saudi $8 billion were for precision-guided missiles and other munitions to the regime currently leading a genocidal war against Yemen, making more cash off of killing innocent people. Now let's turn to Israel, which uses the justification of Iran's involvement in Syria to attack targets, killing innocent Syrians and violating Syria's sovereignty against international law, on top of illegally annexing the Syrian Golan region. Israel has also been using the threat of nuclear obliteration of the Jews for years, and they continue to stress this argument the same way they did with the push for the war in Iraq, invoking the fake claim of WMDs. Here's an example of how ridiculous this conspiracy theory of Iran nuclear mayhem is. In 1992, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu claimed that Iran was 3 years away from getting nukes. Then in 1995, he said Iran was 3 to 5 years away. Then in 2009, he claimed they were just 1 to 2 years away, and has been claiming the same thing ever since. The truth is, Israel is just lying. And let's not forget that the Islamic Republic of Iran has never started a war with anyone, and the war which was led against them by Saddam Hussein was done with US backing and support in order to take down Iran. Whilst Iran has not gone around starting wars, the US, on the other hand, has waged war for 222 out of its 243-year existence. The truth is that Trump does not care about Iran or its people. And just like the US government did in 1953 with the democratically elected Mossadegh, they wish to remove the Iranian government, killing vast amounts of its innocent civilians in the process so that they can own Iran and prevent support for the Palestinian cause, as well as complete their program to end Middle East sovereignty. However, this time, this war will be a disaster for the world economy, the US itself, and will likely lead to a regional cataclysm. It is very simple. No matter what you think of Iran, another war based on Israeli and Western government conspiracy theories, just like the WMD lies cooked up to send us into Iraq, is something we all need to oppose. Because if we don't, millions of people are going to die.